Once upon a time, in a kingdom of glittering palaces and golden crowns, there lived a princess who had everything except a friend. Her halls were filled with jewels, her tables with feasts, but her heart was emptier than the cold marble floors beneath her feet. One morning, when loneliness pressed heavily on her shoulders, a single scent drifted through the air, warm, sweet, and comforting. Bread. Fresh bread, baked with care in the village below. That simple fragrance would lead her to a humble baker and to a friendship more precious than any crown. Welcome, dreamer. You've arrived at Calm Stories for Sleep, where each night we share gentle tales to help you drift off into rest. Find a soft place to settle. Close your eyes and let your body sink into comfort. Each word is here to guide you toward peace and calm. Before we begin, I'd love for you to join our community of dreamers. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Your little note might bring a smile to someone else drifting off beside you. Now, let us return to the story. Princess Ilara stood at her window, gazing at the world beyond the palace gates. From above, she could see the rooftops of the village clustered close together, like friends whispering secrets. The palace was vast, but it echoed with silence. The villagers below had little, yet they had one another. Ilara watched them light lanterns, gather in the square, and carry baskets through winding streets. To her, those simple lives glowed brighter than any jewel in her crown. On this morning, the air shifted. A new scent rose on the breeze, curling through her open window. It was unlike the perfumes and roses she had known. It was warm, sweet, alive, the smell of bread. Ilara leaned forward, closing her eyes as she breathed it in. Somehow, this fragrance filled the empty places in her heart. It was a promise of comfort, of belonging, of something real. And though she did not yet know it, the path of her life had just begun to change. For where bread rises, so too can hope. The next morning, the princess woke earlier than usual. The palace was still cloaked in silence, the corridors empty, save for the soft shuffle of servants beginning their daily routines. Yet even before her eyes were fully open, Ilara's heart stirred with memory. That smell, the golden fragrance of bread, had lingered in her dreams. She had dreamed not of ballrooms or jewels, but of sitting at a table of plain wood, a basket of warm loaves before her, steam rising in the dawn light. She dreamed of hands, not hands bejeweled with rings, but flour-dusted and gentle, breaking bread and sharing it with laughter. It was only a dream, and yet it felt more alive than the waking world around her. At breakfast, the royal cooks laid out platters of sugared fruits, candied nuts, and pastries so delicate they crumbled at a single touch. They were beautiful, but when Ilara tasted them, her heart gave no response. She chewed politely, swallowed quietly, but all the while her mind drifted to that other flavor. The flavor she had not yet known, but longed to. Bread, not bread wrapped in silk napkins and sprinkled with rare spices, but bread made in the village by hands that shaped it with care. Her longing grew until she could bear it no longer. Rising from the table, she made a small excuse, a headache, perhaps, and left before her ladies-in-waiting could follow. She hurried through the palace, her steps quick and silent, until at last she reached the narrow passage that led to a hidden gate in the outer wall. Few remembered it existed. Ilara had discovered it as a child while exploring. With her hood drawn low, she slipped into the morning. The village greeted her with a rush of sounds and scents. Cobblestones clicked beneath the hooves of horses. Vendors called out their wares in bright voices. A child laughed as he chased a wooden hoop through the street. To Alara, every sound felt alive, as though she had stepped into a painting filled with color after living too long among pale marble halls. And then there it was, the smell. It curled through the air, rich and inviting, guiding her like a gentle hand. She followed it past a row of market stalls, past a woman selling ribbons, past a fountain where pigeons bathed. Each step drew her closer until at last she came upon a small shop with a wooden sign swinging above the door. The sign was simple, a carving of a loaf of bread. Ilara's heart beat quickly as she stepped closer. Warmth spilled out from the open doorway. She paused, taking in the sight. Inside were shelves lined with baskets, each filled with golden loaves and rolls. Some were round, some long and crusty, some braided like ribbons. The air was alive with the fragrance, a comfort so deep it felt like a blanket around her shoulders. Behind the counter stood a young man. His hair was dark and untidy, flecked with flour. His sleeves were rolled high on his arms, which were strong from kneading dough. He moved with quiet rhythm, as though baking was not just his work, but his song. He was humming softly to himself as he lifted a loaf from a pan and set it gently on the counter to cool. For a moment, Elara forgot to move. She only watched, her heart strangely caught by the simple scene. The young man looked up and noticed her. His eyes were warm, his expression open, and he smiled as though seeing her was the most ordinary and pleasant thing in the world. "Good morning, traveler," he said. His voice was steady and kind. "You've come at just the right time. The bread has only just finished baking." Alara hesitated. Her tongue felt clumsy. She was a princess, used to commanding entire rooms with her words. Yet before this humble baker, she felt suddenly shy. I smelled it," she confessed softly, lowering her hood a little. "From far away, it called me here." The baker chuckled gently, not in mockery, but in delight. "Then the bread has done its work," he said. "It should call to the hungry, not just the stomach, but the heart. Would you like to try some?" Ilara's breath caught. No one in the palace ever asked her such a question. Meals were always placed before her without choice, without thought. Here was someone offering, not commanding. "Yes, please," she whispered. The baker cut a piece from the loaf, steam rising in the cool morning air. He placed it carefully on a small wooden plate and slid it across the counter. Ilara lifted it with trembling hands. The crust was crisp and warm, the inside soft and airy. She took a bite, and the taste filled her mouth. Rich, earthy, comforting in a way no sugared pastry could ever be. Tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. It's wonderful," she said, her voice thick. The baker tilted his head, studying her with a kindness that felt as nourishing as the bread itself. "Bread is meant to be shared," he said. "It carries warmth from the oven to the table, from the heart of one to the heart of another." Ilara looked at him then, really looked. His clothes were simple, his hands rough with work, yet there was something in his presence that shone brighter than gold. In that moment, she realized something quietly extraordinary. For all the treasures of her palace, she had never tasted anything so rich. For all the jewels that weighed upon her crown, she had never felt anything so light. She had come for bread, but she had found something far greater. And though she did not yet know it, this was only the first of many mornings that would draw her back to the little bakery on the village street. From that first morning, Princess Ilara found herself drawn again and again to to the little bakery at the edge of the village. At first she told herself it was only the bread, that warm, golden taste that filled her with comfort no feast could match. But soon she realized it was not just the bread that called to her. It was the baker himself. His name, she learned, was Oren. Oren was as steady as the rising sun. Each morning he worked with quiet dedication, shaping dough long before the village stirred awake. His hands were strong, but his touch gentle, as though every loaf he baked was a gift. He had a way of speaking that made even the simplest words feel like truths worth remembering. "Bread is alive," he told her one morning as he kneaded dough. "It breathes when it rises. It changes with care. If you rush it, it collapses. If you tend it with patience, it becomes something beautiful." Ilara listened, captivated. No one in the palace spoke like that. To Oren, bread was not just food. It was a mirror of life, of hope, of love. Day after day, she returned, always cloaked and hidden, always with her heart beating fast as she slipped through the secret gate. She would stand at his counter, tasting the day's bread, sometimes helping him carry baskets to the front, sometimes simply listening as he hummed old village songs. And slowly, almost without noticing, Elara began to smile more easily. Her laughter, soft and sweet, began to fill the little shop. Oren noticed too. Sometimes, when she laughed, he would pause in his work just to look at her, his eyes warm and bright. It was a simple thing, but in that small bakery, the lonely princess felt truly seen. The days turned into weeks. Elara's visits grew longer, her heart lighter. She told Oren little pieces of herself, never her true name, never the secret of her crown, but glimpses of her heart. She spoke of her love for music, of her longing to feel useful, of how she wished she could walk among the villagers without disguise. And Oren listened, always with gentle attention, as though her words were precious. "Whoever you are," he said once, "you carry a great silence in your eyes, but you're meant for more than silence. You're meant for laughter." His words lingered in her heart long after she left. One morning, as she helped him braid dough for sweet loaves, Ilara realized her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something softer, deeper. She glanced at Oren, at the flour dusting his hair, at the kindness in his face, and warmth rushed through her like the glow of an oven. She was falling in love, and though she tried to deny it, she knew it was true. But secrets do not stay hidden forever. The king and queen had noticed changes in their daughter. They saw how she drifted through the palace with a distant smile, how she slipped away at odd hours. Servants whispered of cloaked figures leaving through hidden gates. Suspicion grew. One morning, as Elara returned from the bakery, the queen's sharp eyes caught her at the edge of the courtyard. "Where have you been, child?" the queen asked, her voice cool but edged with steel. Elara froze. She wanted to speak the truth, to tell her mother of the warmth she had found in the village. But fear held her tongue. She bowed her head and murmured, "I was walking in the gardens." The queen studied her, unconvinced, but said nothing more. Still, Elara felt the weight of her mother's gaze long after she left. That evening, behind closed doors, the king and queen spoke in hushed tones. "Our daughter wanders too freely," the king said. "There are whispers she slips beyond the palace walls." The queen's voice was cold. "A princess consorting with villagers is unthinkable. If she seeks companionship, it must be with nobility, someone who will strengthen our kingdom, not weaken it." And so, quietly, they set watch on her steps. The next morning, Ilara returned to the bakery, unaware that hidden eyes followed her through the village streets. She entered the shop with her usual smile, but Irene noticed the shadow in her expression. "You look troubled," he said softly. Ilara hesitated. "My parents. They expect me to be someone I am not, to live a life that feels heavy as stone." Oren placed a warm loaf into her hands. "Then carry this instead," he said gently. "It may not lighten the crown, but perhaps it can lighten the heart." Her eyes softened, filling with tears she could not let fall. In that moment, with the bread warm against her palms and Irene's kindness steady beside her, she longed to speak the truth, to tell him she was not just a cloaked girl, but the princess of the realm. But before she could, a sharp sound broke the moment. The clatter of boots outside. Ilara turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Through the open door, she saw palace guards moving down the street, their eyes scanning the crowd. They were searching for her. She pulled her hood low, her hands trembling. Oren noticed, his brow furrowing. "Ilara," he whispered, for by now she had given him at least her true name. "What is it?" Before she could answer, the guards passed directly by the bakery door. One paused, peering inside. Ilara's heart hammered. She knew then that her secret mornings of bread and laughter could not last forever, for love had found her. But so too had danger. The bakery had become Ilara's secret haven. Morning after morning, she slipped through the hidden gate, her heart racing with both fear and anticipation. And each time Oren was there, flour-dusted, steady, his hands shaping bread as though they shaped peace itself. He never asked her for riches, never treated her as anything more than the girl he knew, cloaked and smiling at his counter. And it was that very simplicity that drew Ilara deeper into his world. One dawn, when the village still lay in shadow, Ilara arrived earlier than usual. She found Oren kneeling beside the oven, coaxing the fire to life. He looked up and grinned at the sight of her. "You're early," he said, brushing ash from his hands. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The palace walls feel smaller each day." Oren gestured for her to sit. He placed a lump of dough in front of her. "Then knead with me. Bread doesn't care if you're restless." It was warm beneath her fingers, pliant and alive. Side by side, they worked in silence, the crackle of the fire and the rhythm of kneading filling the quiet. For the first time, Ilara felt not like a princess burdened with duty, but simply a girl shaping bread with someone she trusted. When the loaves were baked, Oren broke one open and offered her half. Steam curled in the air. Their hands brushed as she took it, and warmth rushed through her chest, not from the bread, but from him. She looked up and caught his gaze. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. "Ilara," Oren said softly, her name carrying a weight he did not fully understand. "Whoever you truly are, I am glad you find your way here." Her throat tightened. She longed to tell him everything, yet fear held her tongue. She only whispered back, "And I am glad you are here to be found." But beyond the bakery walls, shadows stirred. The king and queen had grown impatient. Servants had reported the princess's disappearances. Guards had glimpsed her cloaked figure slipping through the gates, and rumors whispered of her wandering the village streets. One afternoon, when the council had been dismissed, the queen called for her daughter. Ilara entered the chamber, her heart already uneasy. The king sat tall upon his chair, his expression stern. The queen's eyes were sharp as glass. "You vanish at dawn, return flushed, and avoid our questions. Where do you go?" Ilara's heart pounded. she bowed her head. I walk among the gardens. Do not lie to us, the king thundered. Our guards have followed you. You go to the village, to a shop. Ilara's breath caught. Her secret was no longer her own. The queen leaned forward, her voice like ice, and worse. It is not only bread you seek, it is the company of a commoner, a baker. At that, Ilara lifted her chin, defiance sparking in her chest. Orin is kind. He has given me more warmth in a loaf of bread than this palace has in all its feasts. You speak of him as though he were nothing. You are a princess. Your heart is not yours to give. We have alliances to secure, suitors of rank and wealth awaiting your hand. Do you think we would allow you to throw away the crown for a baker? Ilara's voice trembled, but she did not falter. I would rather be poor and loved than rich and lonely. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The queen rose, her gown sweeping the floor. Enough. You will not see this baker again. We forbid it. Guards will watch the gates, and your steps will be accounted for. If you defy us, you will bring shame upon this kingdom. Ilara's throat burned with unshed tears, but she stood tall. She bowed stiffly and turned to leave, her heart shattering with every step. That night, alone in her chamber, she pressed her face into her pillow and wept. She thought of the bakery's warmth, of the way Aran's eyes softened when he looked at her, of the laughter they shared over kneaded dough. The thought of never returning was unbearable. I will find a way back to him. Unbeknownst to her, a guard stood in the shadows beyond her door, listening. He would carry her words back to the king and queen. The next morning, Orin waited at the bakery door, watching the street as the sun rose higher. But Ilara did not come. His smile faded. Something in his chest tightened, as though he knew, as though he felt her absence, not as chance, but as fate turning against them. And so began the storm. The days after the king and queen's fury were the hardest of Ilara's life. Guards shadowed her footsteps from dawn till dusk. The secret gate was barred and locked. Even her windows were watched from below. Every path to the village seemed sealed shut. But no matter how many walls her parents raised, her heart still wandered to the little bakery. At breakfast, she tasted the palace bread and found it dry. At banquets, she sat at golden tables and longed for the wooden counter where Arain's laughter warmed the air. At night, she closed her eyes and smelled phantom loaves, soft and golden, fresh from his hands. It was a hunger that could not be silenced. One evening, as she sat in her chamber, Ilara noticed a faint sound against the glass of her window. Tap, tap, tap. Her heart leaped. She hurried to the balcony, peering into the garden shadows below. There, half hidden among the ivy, a small figure lifted his hand. A boy, no older than 12, with a cap pulled low. The boy held up a folded slip of parchment. Ilara's breath caught. She lowered a basket on a rope of silken scarves, one of the few freedoms left to her, and the boy tucked the letter inside before vanishing into the night. Hands trembling, she unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, the strokes uneven, but her heart knew them at once. Ilara, the guards came to my shop. They told me to keep away, to forget the girl who comes cloaked to buy bread. But how does one forget the sun when it rises each day? How does one forget warmth when the heart remembers? If you cannot come, then send your words. Bread grows cold without someone to share it with. Or tears blurred her eyes, but her heart soared. He had not given up, neither would she. That night, she wrote by candlelight. Orin, My parents have locked every gate, but they cannot lock my heart. If they say, bread is forbidden, then I will feast on your words. Write to me, and I will find a way to answer, Ilara. She folded the letter, tied it with thread, and lowered it to the boy the next night. Thus began their secret exchange. Every few nights, the boy came tapping at her window. Each time, Arain's letters were tucked beneath his cap, warm with words of comfort. He told her of the village, of children chasing hoops in the square, of flour dust that turned his hair pale, of the songs he hummed while the ovens glowed. She told him of her loneliness, of the heavy silence of the palace, of how her heart beat lighter when she thought of him. The letters were lifelines, threads of warmth stretching across the chasm between their worlds. But words were not enough. One night, Ilara's longing grew too heavy to bear. She penned her boldest letter yet. Orin, I cannot live only in ink and parchment. If I cannot walk to your shop, then meet me where the moonlight touches both palace and village. Tomorrow, at midnight, by the river's edge. When the boy carried her message away, Ilara's heart raced with both dread and hope. If her parents discovered this meeting, the punishment would be severe. But her heart whispered that it was worth the risk. The following night, cloaked in silver moonlight, Ilara stole from her chambers. She slipped through hidden passages she had learned as a child, passages even the guards had forgotten. At the edge of the palace grounds, the river shimmered, its surface carrying the reflection of stars. She waited in the hush of midnight, every rustle of leaves making her heart leap. Then she saw him. Orin stepped from the shadows, his figure steady and sure. He carried no basket of bread, no tools of his trade, only himself and the courage to stand where no baker should ever stand. Ilara, he breathed, as though her name itself was a prayer. She ran to him, her hood falling back, her eyes bright with tears. For a moment, the world shrank to nothing but their embrace, the steady beat of his heart against hers. You came, she whispered. I would cross fire to see you, he replied softly. No guard, no king, no queen can stop what has already taken root. They sat together by the river, their hands entwined, their voices hushed. They spoke of dreams, hers of freedom, his of a life where love was not chained by crowns. He promised her loaves baked in secret, warm and hidden away for her to taste when they could meet again. And for that one night, under the silver stars, they belonged not to a kingdom or a crown, but only to each other. But fate is never silent for long. Unseen by them both, a pair of eyes watched from the trees, a loyal guard, torn between duty to his king and pity for the young lovers. He turned back toward the palace with heavy steps, carrying a truth that would soon ignite fury. For though Ilara and Orin had found one another again, the fire of their secret was spreading, and soon it would blaze too brightly to be hidden. The morning after her secret meeting with Orin, Ilara awoke with hope burning like a lantern in her chest. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt light. She moved through the palace corridors, humming softly, unaware that shadows had already gathered against her. At the council chamber, the king and queen awaited. Their faces were calm, their voices unusually gentle. Daughter, the queen said, her hands folded gracefully upon her lap. We have spoken at length of your desires. Perhaps we have been too stern. Ilara froze. Her parents' tone was so different from the thunder and frost of their last confrontation that she hardly recognized it. The king gave a grave nod. A princess's heart should not be crushed like stone beneath duty. We see now that we must Consider your happiness. Her breath caught. You mean? The queen's lips curved in a delicate smile. We mean only this. We shall not forbid you to speak with this baker again. But we must see for ourselves whether he is worthy. Bring him to us, Ilara. Let us judge him not as rumor, but as man. Her heart leaped. It felt too good to be true, yet she wanted to believe it. She wanted so desperately for the walls between her and Orin to fall. I will, she said softly, her voice trembling with both fear and joy. The king leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard despite the softness of his words. Good, then it is settled. That evening, Ilara sent a letter by the same boy who had carried so many of their secrets. Orin, there is hope. My parents wish to meet you. They have agreed to see with their own eyes the man who has won my heart. Come to the palace tomorrow evening when the sun begins to fall. Walk boldly to the gate, and I shall meet you there. Ilara. When Orin read her words, flour still clinging to his sleeves, his chest swelled with both pride and fear. He had never imagined stepping beyond the palace gates as anything more than a tradesman delivering loaves. Yet, if Ilara trusted him, if she believed this meeting could change everything, then he would not fail her. That night, he worked the dough with a fire in his soul. From it he baked a single golden loaf, shaped with care, and brushed until it shone like sunlight. He would bring it as his gift, humble yet honest. The following evening, the palace courtyard gleamed with torchlight. Guards lined the stone path, their faces expressionless, their eyes sharp. At the gates, Orin arrived in his best tunic, simple but clean, the bread cradled in his hands. Ilara met him there, her cloak shimmering in the twilight. Her heart ached with both relief and fear. You came, she whispered. For you, I would walk into the lion's den, he answered with a smile. Together, they stepped into the palace. The king and queen received them in the grand hall. The queen's jewels glittered, her expression unreadable. The king sat rigid as stone, his crown heavy upon his brow. Orin bowed low, offering the loaf. Your Majesties, he said, with as much grace as he could muster. I am but a baker, yet I bring what I know best, bread shaped with care, as your daughter has shaped my heart. Ilara squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. The queen's smile was sweet, but her eyes remained sharp as daggers. How charming! A man of humble craft, daring to love a princess. The king's voice was deep and steady. Tell us, baker, do you believe love alone feeds a kingdom? Can flour and fire keep a crown upon a head? Orin met the king's gaze without faltering. Love may not feed armies, sire, but it feeds the spirit. Without it, even the richest feasts taste bitter. Ilara's heart swelled at his courage. For a moment, she thought she saw the queen's lips twitch, almost approvingly, but beneath the table, the king's hand clenched into a fist. Leave us, the queen said gently to her daughter. We would speak with this young man alone. Ilara hesitated, dread creeping through her, but Orin gave her a small nod, as if to say, trust me. With a reluctant step, she obeyed, retreating toward the door. The moment she was gone, the sweetness drained from the queen's face. Her voice turned to steel. You dare to steal our daughter's heart. A baker, nothing more than dust and dough. Orin stood tall, though fear pricked his skin. I did not steal it, your grace. She gave it freely, and I would guard it more fiercely than all your gold. The king rose, towering above him. Bold words. But boldness does not crown kings or guard kingdoms. You will not see her again. Arain's jaw tightened. With respect, I cannot obey. To turn from her would be to deny the very life within me. The queen's eyes narrowed. Then you leave us no choice. She clapped her hands. Guards stepped forward, their armor clinking. You shall be watched, the king decreed. One misstep, one attempt to reach her again, and you will be cast from this kingdom, or worse. Arain's heart pounded. He wanted to cry out, to fight, but he knew any word might endanger Elara further. With a heavy breath, he bowed. If I must leave, I leave with her name in my heart. The guards seized his arms, dragging him from the hall. From the shadows of the doorway, Elara watched, her heart breaking. The sweetness of her parents' promise had been nothing but honey hiding poison. And now, she knew, the trap had been sprung. The iron gates of the palace dungeon groaned as they swung shut behind Orin. The sound echoed through the cold chamber like the closing of fate itself. Guards shoved him forward into the dim stone cell. Chains rattled as they fastened the door. The only light came from a barred window high above, where the moon's glow barely touched the floor. Orin sank onto the rough bench, his heart heavy. He had faced the king and queen's wrath with courage, but here, alone, the weight of their power pressed on him like a mountain. He thought of his bakery, his ovens now cold and waiting. He thought of the boy who had carried letters between him and Elara, perhaps now turned away in fear. But most of all, he thought of her, the princess who had risked everything to love a baker. Hold fast, he whispered to himself. If I must be stone, I will be stone, but my heart will not crack. Far above, in her chamber, Elara pressed her ear to her door, straining to hear the whispers of the servants. He's been thrown into the dungeons, one voice murmured. The king says it will teach her where her loyalty lies. Another replied. Elara's chest burned. Rage and sorrow tangled within her. She had begged her parents to see reason, to see the truth of her heart, but they had chosen chains over compassion. That night, while the palace slept, she lit a single candle and unfurled parchment upon her desk. Orin, I saw what they did. I heard the chains. But hear me, this is not the end. I will find a way to free you, even if the world calls it folly, even if they strip me of my crown. I will not let them keep us apart. Elara. She folded the letter, sealing it with wax and a pressed flower, a secret mark between them. When the candle burned low, she summoned the boy who had been their faithful messenger. Slipping him the note, she whispered, "Go to the dungeons. There are guards, but you are small and quick. Find a way, please." The boy's eyes widened, but he nodded bravely. "For you, princess, I will try." The following day, Orin sat in silence when he heard a faint shuffle near the bars. A tiny hand slipped a folded note through the gap. He unfolded it, and when his eyes met Elara's words, his heart leaped. For the first time since his capture, hope surged within him. He pressed the letter to his chest and whispered to the empty cell, "Then I will wait. I will hold fast until she comes." But not all ears in the dungeon were kind. From a nearby corridor, a guard had noticed the boy's movements. He followed silently, suspicion darkening his gaze. That night, he reported to the king. "Your Majesty," the guard said, "the princess continues to plot with the prisoner. Notes pass between them still." The king's fury burned like wildfire. "Does she defy us, even now? Then we must act before her folly destroys the crown." The queen placed a hand on his arm. Her voice was colder still. "If she will not surrender her heart, then perhaps we must break it permanently." The king's jaw tightened. "So be it. Tomorrow, we move him deeper. No window, no light, no messenger can reach him. That night, Ilara dreamed of stone walls closing in around Orin, sealing him away forever. She awoke with tears streaming down her face and a single thought burning in her mind. I must act before they do. She dressed in silence, cloaking herself in a gown of midnight blue. With trembling hands, she drew from her drawer a small golden key, one she had stolen long ago, a spare that opened forgotten doors in the lower halls. Her heart pounded as she whispered to the night, "Wait for me, Orin, I'm coming." And so, as the palace slumbered, the princess lit her lantern and stepped into the secret stairways that led downward, deeper and deeper toward the dungeon where her love awaited. She did not know that in the shadows above, her parents' trap was tightening, for the king and queen had not only planned to move Orin deeper, they had planned something far worse, a trial by shame, one that would force their daughter to choose between crown and heart under the watch of the entire kingdom. And as Ilara descended into the dark, she carried only hope, not yet knowing the storm that awaited. The dungeon air was heavy with damp stone and the scent of rusted chains. Ilara's lantern flickered as she crept through the narrow passage, her breath shallow with fear and hope. The golden key trembled in her hand as she slipped it into the lock of Iran's cell. The bolt gave a low groan, and when the door opened, Iran's weary eyes lifted from the shadows. "Ilara," he whispered, disbelief and wonder tangled in his voice. She rushed to him, falling into his arms as the lantern cast its glow upon the walls. "I couldn't wait," she breathed. "They plan to bury you deeper, where no light can find you. I had to see you, had to touch your hand once more." Orin held her close, his voice fierce, though his body trembled from weariness. "I feared I would never look upon you again. Tell me it is not a dream." "It is no dream," she whispered, "and I will not let them win. If I must trade my crown for your freedom, I will." For a moment, the dungeon vanished. There was only the warmth of their embrace, the steady thrum of hearts beating in defiance of chains and crowns. But then, the heavy clang of iron doors echoed behind them. The lantern shook in Ilara's hand. From the shadows, guards stepped forward, their torches blazing. Behind them came the king and queen, cloaked in regal fury. "Ilara," the king's voice thundered, "is this what you choose, to crawl into darkness for a baker?" The queen's gaze was cold as ice. "You shame us, you shame your crown. But if you love him so dearly, then let all the kingdom witness the depth of your folly." Before Ilara could cry out, rough hands seized her and Orin both. The lantern crashed to the floor, extinguished, and the dungeon filled with the sound of chains and marching boots. At dawn, the great square of the kingdom swelled with people. Word had spread like wildfire. The princess and a baker, caught in secret embrace, were to be judged before all. Ilara stood beside Orin, her wrists bound with silken cords, softer than iron, yet no less cruel. The king sat upon a raised throne, the queen at his side, their eyes hard as stone. A herald's voice rang across the crowd. "Behold Princess Ilara, heir to this kingdom. Behold Orin, a common baker. They stand accused not of crime, but of defiance, of placing love above duty, of shaming crown and kingdom alike." Murmurs rippled through the gathered villagers. Some faces showed pity, others awe, and a few quiet defiance, for they remembered the bread that had warmed their bellies, the kindness of the baker who now stood in chains. The king rose, his voice like a blade. "Daughter, we grant you one chance. Denounce this man, Cast aside this folly, and reclaim your honor. Do so, and we shall forget this shame. Refuse, and you shall lose not only your crown, but him as well." The crowd hushed, waiting. Elara lifted her chin, her eyes burning with tears, but steady as fire. "Father, mother, you speak of honor as though it lives only in jewels and thrones. But I have seen true honor. It is in the hands that shape bread for the hungry, in the heart that gives without asking. If loving Orain is folly, then I choose folly. Gladly, I choose it." A gasp swept through the crowd. The king's face darkened. The queen's hand curled into a fist. Beside Elara, Orain stepped forward, his voice ringing with quiet strength. "I ask no crown, no throne, only the right to love her as she is, not as her title commands. If that makes me unworthy, then so be it. But I will not lie. I love her, and I always shall." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the flutter of banners in the wind. And then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice cried out, "Let them be." It was the boy messenger, standing, small but fierce. "He has fed us when our bellies were empty. He has given us warmth when the nights were cold. Who among us would call that shame?" Others took up the cry, voices rising like a tide. "Let them be. The baker is kind. The princess deserves her heart." The king's face turned scarlet as the crowd swelled with shouts of support. The queen's eyes narrowed, calculating. This was no longer merely a matter of their daughter. It was a spark threatening to ignite the loyalty of the people. She leaned to the king, her voice a hiss meant only for him. "We must be careful. Crush them now, and we may crush the people with them. But bend too far, and we lose control." The king's jaw tightened. He raised his hand, and silence rippled through the square. "So be it," he declared. "The princess has chosen, but choice has consequence. From this day forward, she is no longer bound by crown, nor welcomed in this court. If she would have the baker, then let her walk among bakers. The palace doors are closed to her." A murmur of shock swept through the crowd. Elara's heart pounded, stripped of her crown, cast out from her home. Yet, when she turned to Orin, his eyes met hers with unshaken warmth. "If you are with me," he whispered, "then even exile is a kingdom." She pressed her bound hands against his. "Then let us walk it together." The king's decree echoed through the square, final and unyielding. But in the hearts of the people, a seed had been planted. The seed of a love too strong for chains, too bright for crowns. And though Elara and Orin were led from the square as prisoners of choice, they knew a truth that no decree could break. Their story was only just beginning. The palace gates closed behind them with a thundering finality. But Elara did not look back. Her hand was twined with Orin's, their wrists still raw from bonds that had only just been cut. Before them stretched the cobbled road leading to the village, lined with trees whose branches swayed in the morning light. For the first time, she walked not as a princess in silks, but as a woman with nothing to her name but her heart. And strangely, she felt free. The village welcomed them with quiet awe. Some bowed out of habit, but Elara shook her head. "No more titles," she said softly. "I am only Elara now." At first, it was strange to live without the marble walls and silken chambers she had known all her life. But the people of the village embraced her with kindness. An old seamstress gave her a bundle of simple dresses. A farmer pressed eggs into her hands. Children brought flowers to brighten her new home, a small, sunlit cottage at the edge of the baker's square. and there a rain's oven once more roared with life. Together they kneaded dough at dawn, their laughter rising with the steam of fresh loaves. Ilara's fingers, once delicate and idle, grew strong with work. She dusted her cheeks with flour, braided loaves with care, and often left tiny sprigs of lavender tucked in the crusts, so each bread carried a trace of her touch. The villagers delighted in the change. "The bread tastes sweeter," they whispered. "Perhaps love itself is baked into it." In the evenings, when the day's work was done, Oren and Elara would sit outside the cottage, watching fireflies weave golden trails through the twilight. The fields whispered with crickets, the air warm with the scent of earth and grain. Ilara Orain murmured one night, brushing a flower-streaked strand of hair from her cheek, "Do you regret it, leaving behind all you once knew?" She leaned into him, her gaze soft but steady. "I regret nothing. I would rather share bread by your side than jewels in a lonely palace." He kissed her hand, his eyes shining with a tenderness that needed no words. Life in the village was not without hardship. Rain sometimes spoiled the flour, and coin was scarce. Ilara, unaccustomed to such worries, learned to stretch little into enough. She mended her dresses by firelight, helped gather berries when cupboards thinned, and often shared laughter with neighbors over simple meals. There was a strange joy in these struggles, for they faced them together, and the people noticed. The baker and the former princess became symbols of hope, proof that love could cross divides, proof that joy could bloom even from loss. Children played at princess and baker in the streets, chasing each other with laughter. Mothers told their little ones that kindness, not crowns, made hearts noble. Ilara, who had once felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, now felt her wings spread wide. One spring morning, the village square blossomed with celebration. Lanterns swayed from poles, music danced from fiddles, and stalls brimmed with sweetmeats and roasted nuts. It was the festival of planting, the day when the first seeds of the season were sown, carrying wishes into the soil. Oren pulled Ilara by the hand through the crowd, his grin mischievous. "Come, you've never seen this through a villager's eyes. Today we dance, not bow." Before she could protest, he spun her into the circle of dancers. The fiddles leaped, drums clapped, and laughter filled the air. Ilara's skirts swirled, her cheeks flushed, and for a moment she forgot she had ever been a princess at all. She was only a woman in love, her hand warm in her baker's. When the dance ended, Orain pressed a small pouch of seeds into her palm. "Make a wish," he said. She knelt by the soil at the square's heart, where countless hands had planted before. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "Let our love grow strong, rooted deeper than any crown could sever." Then she pressed the seeds into the earth. As twilight fell, villagers gathered around bonfires. Stories were told, bread was shared, and Arain's arm rested around Ilara's shoulders as she leaned against him, her heart full to the brim. Yet, as the flames flickered, a shadow stirred at the edge of her thoughts. She caught the glance of a traveler in the crowd, a man cloaked too heavily for the season, his gaze fixed not on the fire, but on her. When she blinked, he melted into the dark, gone as quickly as he had appeared. She told herself it was nothing, only a trick of firelight, and yet a chill lingered at her spine. Later, when the village lay quiet beneath the stars, Ilara and Oren sat outside their cottage once more. Fireflies floated like drifting embers, and the world seemed wrapped in peace. Alara, Arain said softly, I never dreamed I would deserve this, deserve you. But every day you prove that love can change the world. She smiled, laying her head against his shoulder. And you, Orain, prove that love can feed it. They laughed quietly, content. But beyond the fields, in the silence of night, a lone rider galloped toward the palace. In his satchel lay a parchment sealed with the mark of a raven, a message for the king and queen. The crown had not forgotten them, and though Ilara and Oren now blossomed in hope, dark roots of schemes were already spreading beneath the soil. The morning began with sunlight spilling like honey over the rooftops. Birds sang from the hedges, children darted through the square with ribbons, and the air smelled of warm bread rising in Arain's oven. Ilara leaned out of the cottage window, her hair unbound, watching the village come alive. For the first time in her life, she felt she belonged not to a crown, but to a home. Inside, Oren pulled a golden loaf from the oven. He grinned as he dusted flour from his hands. Another day, another bread for the people. And today, Ilara, I think we'll make sweet cakes for the children. She laughed, a sound like bells in spring. Do you know, Oren, I think this is what true royalty feels like. Giving joy to others, not ruling them. He crossed the kitchen, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and whispered, Then you are the noblest queen of them all. They held each other for a heartbeat longer than usual. Perhaps it was the warmth of the oven, or perhaps it was something deeper, a silent prayer that nothing could disturb this fragile peace. But peace rarely lasts when crowns are involved. The first sign came with the thunder of hooves. At midday, the villagers gathered in the square to trade loaves and stories. When the sound of riders cut through the chatter, dust rose on the road as a column of soldiers in gleaming armor advanced, their banners black and gold, their pace unyielding. The villagers' laughter died. Mothers clutched children close. Farmers stepped back into doorways. Ilara's heart stopped. She knew those banners, the king's crest. Her parents had found them. The soldiers dismounted, their boots striking the cobblestones with iron weight. At their head rode a captain with eyes like polished steel. He raised a scroll bound with scarlet wax. By decree of His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen, his voice thundered. The runaway Princess Ilara is charged with treason, rebellion, and betrayal of crown and blood. She is ordered to return at once to the palace to face judgment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ilara stood frozen, her hand clutching Arain's sleeve. And as for the baker Oren, the captain continued, unrolling the scroll further. He is charged with seduction of royalty, conspiracy against the crown, and theft of noble dignity. By the king's command, he is to be seized and imprisoned until the court decides his fate. Shouts erupted, some of anger, some of fear. The villagers murmured among themselves, torn between loyalty to their princess and fear of the crown's wrath. Oren stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and the soldiers. His voice was steady, though his fists clenched at his sides. I have stolen nothing. I have conspired with no one. I only love her. The captain's lips curled in disdain. Love is not law. Love is not crown. Step aside, baker, or be cut down where you stand. Ilara's voice rang clear over the square, trembling but fierce. No, if you take him, you take me. I will not leave his side. The soldiers advanced. Steel flashed in the sun. The villagers stirred, some crying out, others pressing forward. An old farmer shouted, She is one of us now. You'll not take her without fight. A seamstress raised her spindle as though it were a spear. Children clung to their mothers, weeping. The captain's command sliced the air, seized them both. In an instant, the square erupted into chaos. Villagers hurled baskets, stones, and even loaves of bread at the soldiers. Guards pushed forward with shields raised. Shouts and cries mingled with the clang of steel. Orain seized Ilara's hand. "Run," he cried. They darted between stalls, dodging overturned barrels and scattering chickens into the fray. Ilara's heart pounded in her ears as soldiers closed in from all sides. "Through the orchard," Orin shouted, pulling her toward a narrow path. But just as they neared the edge of the square, a ring of armored men closed around them, swords drawn. Ilara clutched Orain's arm. Soldiers pressed closer, hemming them in, their blades glinting. The captain raised his voice above the clamor. "You cannot hide from your blood, princess. The crown always claims its own." The world seemed to still. Ilara and Orin, hand in hand, stood encircled, villagers shouting in defiance behind them, soldiers tightening their grip before them. And just as the captain lifted his sword to signal capture, a horn's blast cut through the square, long, low, and dreadful. From the hills beyond the village, another force was coming. Banners snapped in the wind, black against the sun. More soldiers, reinforcements. The trap was closing. Ilara's breath caught, her eyes meeting Orin's. Love burned between them, fierce and unyielding, but so did fear. This was no longer a game of secret letters or stolen dances. This was war between heart and crown. And as the soldiers lunged, the chapter of their peace shattered into pieces. And so, dear dreamer, the tale of the princess and the baker pauses here, with love caught in the grip of shadows and a crown tightening its hold. What will become of Ilara and Orin? Only time will tell when our story continues. For now, let your heart rest in the warmth of their love, even as the world rises against them. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and drift gently into dreams, knowing that tomorrow brings new chapters waiting to unfold. Thank you for joining me tonight on Calm Stories for Sleep. If you enjoyed this tale, I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Share it in the comments, and let's keep building this cozy circle of dreamers together. Until we meet again, may your sleep be peaceful and your dreams be kind.